Good afternoon and welcome to Light on the Hill. I am Pastor John. This week we're going to be doing a little bit of follow-up on what we talked about last week on studying the Bible. I'm going to kind of follow up on, there's a couple questions I kind of wanted to get to and kind of cover. So we're going to be doing that this week. It shouldn't go on as long as last week though. So our verse for today is 2 Timothy 2:15. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. So the big thing which I kind of want to cover is using, how to kind of use the internet, specifically resources that are available online to enhance your studying. Now I'm going to be honest here. For me personally, I am not as much of a fan of using a lot of these online resources for certain things. There are things which I use which are available online, but generally when I kind of go and I study and I prepare for a verse, I tend to go to commentaries because I know in that situation that the resource I'm getting has been written within the past 10 years and is written by somebody who is actually an expert on that topic. But there are a lot of resources online that are very available to anybody out there that you can use. So one of the big sort of thing which I would recommend for you out there to go and actually use the internet for, and what I would suggest kind of for that is for specific certain things. So I mentioned last week how one of the steps that I take is I pull up the verse which I'm preparing for, and I look at it over 3 different translations. So that is best to do online. Bible Gateway has a wonderful feature where you can actually put translations side by side, and what that allows you to do is it lets you look through and see how different scholars have translated that original text into English, which can give you some ideas of some words that might be important within that text that there's some disagreement on. Which that leads to the next thing which I typically use online, which is lexicons. Lexicons are what you'd use for, like, say, a word studying when you're looking at a word like that is translated differently between translations, that you want to kind of understand the sort of why behind it. The big one is on that I use is on Bible Studies Tools, which is another great resource that gives you a source where you can see the words and how they're used within different verses across the entire New Testament and even Old Testament. And really what a lexicon is for is it's for you to find what the Greek word or Hebrew word was in that passage and how it is used in different passages. And it can give you an idea of how the difference between the original language versus today's language, and also kind of give you a little bit of a general idea as to, again, as I said, why it got translated differently. Because a lot of times words in other languages can mean multiple things, and that doesn't necessarily translate well to another language. So I guess to kind of get into this, there are, however, with the internet especially, there are things which are good study habits to have, and also things which are bad study habits to have. And I kind of highlighted a little bit of this, but whenever you're doing any research online, and especially with the Bible, my encouragement to you is to always make sure that the source you're pulling from is written by somebody who's actually an expert in the field that you're looking at. And that's with anything. But when it comes to the Bible, the important thing to understand here with that is that when you go and you get a degree in biblical scholarship, it does not necessarily mean that you would be considered an expert on every single part of the Bible. Generally, when you have finished your education in terms of biblical scholarship, you're an expert on, like, a small portion of books, or occasionally just like one. And the reason is that the Bible, you have so many different books, you have so many different types of literature, it really would be very difficult, possibly impossible, for somebody to really truly be at the forefront of scholarship for every single part of it. So that's something that's important to note. when you're looking at anything that's written by anybody, I would try to look into their kind of their background to make sure that they are indeed somebody who has a level of expertise. That's really important. Now, that doesn't mean that you should discount, somebody's opinion who is kind of a bit of a layman, uh, or isn't, a real expert. Most of us out there are not. But it does mean that when you're seeing somebody's opinion that doesn't necessarily have that sort of expertise, you want to make sure that they're actually pulling from sources that are written by those individuals. This is a time again where I would say go, check their citations if they have them. Obviously, with pastors, myself included, we can't necessarily give that, but you can if you do a little. That's a case where it's a little bit more tricky. Typically there you need to kind of weigh the words based off of other sort of resources that you get, and just also from the Spirit itself. But that is something which I think is very, very important, because as wonderful as the internet is, it has given people a soapbox that they didn't necessarily have before. And as a result, there's a lot of opinions out there that are frankly just not very informed, but because they're either written or spoken by somebody who's popular and has a lot of followers, they get passed around a lot and people act like they mean something. That's not the case. So that's one big thing that I would say is a good habit versus kind of a bad habit. The other thing which I would kind of say, and this is kind of, as I hinted at the beginning, the big reason why I'm not a fan of using the internet itself as a source, or as much for certain sources, is that I would avoid pretty much any commentary that you find online. The reason for this is when it comes to an actual commentary, biblical commentary, generally you want something that's been written within the past 10 years and is written by individuals, as I said, who are scholars within their field. The majority of the commentaries, at least that I've encountered, maybe there's one out there that doesn't count this, are either written by one individual, which that gets into the problem that, they're not necessarily an expert on everything that they're writing on. And it also runs into, the other problem is that a lot of times, because they are putting them out for free, they're commentaries that were written, years and years and years ago. It's very common to find commentaries online that were written by individuals like Martin Luther, which, hey, that's great to kind of get his insight occasionally, but if you're really trying to actually dig into the meaning behind a scripture, scholarship has come a long way from the Reformation. So that's something which is kind of part of the reason which I would sort of put there. And just in general, the worst study habit that you can have when dealing with anything online is going out and just essentially Googling things and just reading things that random people have put online and taking it as truth. That is really the biggest thing. If you're really just paying attention to who's saying what, and you're making sure that the person who is saying that is actually, an expert, and you use that to kind of pull from that, you're going to get a lot more better information than you would if you just listened to a random person online. That is the biggest thing which I would really want you all to take away from this. Besides that, as far as like actual places where you can go to get resources, if you are going to use Google, I would recommend using Google Scholar. That actually gets you to scholarly articles, which that is available. Those are a lot of times available online for free. The other thing is I would recommend, I mentioned Bible study tools, Bible Gateway, Open Bible is another place. Open Bible, I'm pretty sure has some of the same resources as Bible study tools, but the other thing which is kind of nice on Open Bible is it does have a topical index where you can type in a topic and it'll bring up some verses. Now, with that being said, I would recommend that you take those verses and read them within their context, as we kind of talked about last week, because there is a tendency there, since it's an open sort of project, for Bible verses to make it into certain topics that are a little bit actually out of topic when you read it within its context. But still, that's a good source for just like day-to-day sort of information. Another one is Blue Letter Bible. That is another website that has a lot of resources. Now, you might be surprised to hear me say this, but Wikipedia is actually not a bad resource always. The actual issue with Wikipedia and with encyclopedias in general is they tend to just be very general. Um, they don't go into as much depth as you would expect. But Wikipedia is not a bad source for very general information. But again, I would recommend that you check the citations. Check what resources people are pulling from to write those articles, because sometimes they're either not pulling from the greatest of resources or they're heavily skewed, which is something you need to be kind of aware of. So that is all I have for you guys today. I hope that that helps. And with that, I will close us all in prayer. Lord, I thank you so much for this time that we could come together and just continue talking about this topic. I thank you so much for all the blessings you've given us this past week. I continue to pray for all the things we are facing within our country. I just pray that you will help us to come to a resolution on all of these issues with law enforcement and racial discrimination. God, I just pray that you will help us as a country to have this difficult conversation at this time and work through those issues. I also pray for everything going on with the pandemic, that you will just be with our health service officials, that you will give them wisdom and protection as they are guiding us through this all, and that you will keep us all safe. In your name, amen.